Okay, I think we've got everybody here. So first of all, let me thank Catalyst 2030 for the opportunity to share this information with everybody. The work that we're actually starting to do around COVID-19 and thinking a little bit beyond COVID-19 as well. So first of all, let me introduce myself. My name's John Bamforth. I'm the director of the Eshelman Institute for Innovation at the University of North Carolina, part of the Eshelman School of Pharmacy here at the University of North Carolina. So those of you that don't know UNC, a little bit of background on UNC, the oldest public university in the United States. Probably best known for some of the sporting accolades that we have. Mia Hamm and the ladies soccer team, very well known, and some guy called Michael Jordan who apparently played basketball. But this is an English guy, so what would he know about basketball? So what I wanted to do this morning is spend about 15 to 20 minutes going through the work that we have been doing at UNC with some collaboration from some pretty important people I'll talk about later. And also ask for your help. So I'll break it into three parts. We'll talk a little bit about the problem here, and we all know we're right in the middle of a pretty big problem. We'll talk a little bit about the science and what we think we can do from a science perspective. And then we'll close out with some collaboration, as I say, some requests for help. So I wanted to start with an observation. Hopefully many of you seen now what Bill Gates has been saying for quite some time. He's been talking about what we have today. He's been talking about the potential for a pandemic. He's been talking about that for quite some time. So if you go back and look at documentaries on Netflix, if you look at TED Talks, if you look at even last night on CNN here in the United States, he was talking about where we've been, what we need to do in terms of planning for a pandemic. And lo and behold, here we are in the middle of one of the most challenging medical situations that many of us have ever experienced. But he's been a little bit of a lone voice. There have not been very many people saying the same thing. And certainly, as we know today, there's not been very much been done in terms of that planning for a pandemic. And as we get into the heart of COVID-19, we all have seen the challenges, taking it back very personally to ourselves, to our families, to our friends. And as we hit 63,000 deaths here in the United States alone, we can see the real personal impact that's happening on a day-to-day basis. But here's the challenge and here's the problem. You know, we hear people say, you know, this is a once-in-a-lifetime moment, but in reality, this is a series of viruses that we've seen over time. And the reality is, most of the experts believe this is not the one and only virus that we'll see of this type. We believe there'll be future viruses and future pandemics. And that's a pretty scary thing to think about given what we're going through right now. And I don't think any of us want to be in this situation again. It's not one that is very pleasant. It's not good for our personal lives, for our families, for our workplaces. And when we've hit 30 million unemployed here in the United States, you can see the economic impact really having a major effect on this country and around the globe. So the biggest challenge we have from a problem perspective is, yes, another virus is likely to happen, another pandemic is likely to happen, but will we remember what we're going through right now? Or will we forget the challenges? When we get back to some sort of normality, when we have a vaccine, when we have treatments for COVID-19, will we have forgotten what we've just gone through? Will next time we have a plan? That is the question we have in our hands right now. Will we have a strategic plan for the next time we have a pandemic of this sort? So if we look at today, we've all become experts. We've all become experts all of a sudden in testing for COVID-19, testing for the antibodies of COVID-19. As we watch the news on the daily basis, we've become experts listening to the potential treatments for COVID-19. We hear information yesterday on remdesivir, the new antiviral from Gilead that may show some benefits in COVID-19 treatment. And then we've heard over 100 vaccines are in development for COVID-19 right now. So we've all become experts. Whether we're scientists or not, everybody's become an expert. We've had to become experts in this field. And so the challenge is, what does that look like moving forward? We're in the world of developing treatments. That's the world that our organization is focused on right now. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But the question is, if you have a vaccine, why do you ever need a treatment? Well, the reality is, whether you have a vaccine or not, you will always need a treatment for a new virus. The reality is vaccines don't work for everybody. We know that from flu. We know that many of us get flu vaccines every year, but still many people still get the flu and that particular form of the flu every year, and people die every year from the flu. So we will always need treatment. So the strategic plan here for a future pandemic is to make sure that we have treatments. We're better prepared for the next pandemic by having treatments on the shelf ready to go for that next pandemic. And that's the challenge that we've been working through at UNC and with our partners. So what is the challenge with developing that treatment? Well, the first thing is there's really no economic incentive for a company, for a biopharmaceutical company, a place that I spent 30 years in the pharmaceutical industry. There's no incentive financially to develop a treatment for a disease that today does not happen. There is no virus today. So we're planning for a virus that we don't know what that virus is going to look like. So with that in mind, how do you go about it? How do you incent people to do the work to develop a future treatment for a disease or a vaccine that today does not exist? Secondly, through a science lens, how do you predict? How do you predict what treatment might work? Again, you don't know what the virus is going to look like. And that's the challenge that we've been wrapping our heads around over the last 12 to 13 months as we try to predict how we could put in place novel antiviral treatments for those future pandemics. So I'd like to introduce READY to you all. READY is an entity that we're in the middle of setting up, a new global nonprofit called READY. And READY stands for Rapidly Emerging Antiviral Drug Development Initiative. A bit of a mouthful. READY, I hope everybody can remember, but it's really the idea of developing medicines for future pandemics. So our goal is to develop 5 new antivirals to be sitting on the shelf in the early stages of clinical development, ready to be turned on should we see one of these terrible pandemics in the future. And for those of you who work in the science world and those of you who work in drug development already, you can see how high, how high a bar that is. The idea of having 5 new medicines in 5 years is a really high bar. And we understand that. We've deliberately made that a high bar. But that's the challenge. We want to be ready. And that's the challenge we want to take on with READY. So I'd like to move now from the problem somewhat into the solution and some of the science stories that we've started to put together. So really, through a science lens, we've got 5 steps. The first is we're going to focus on 4 viral families. And maybe later we can talk about which families those are. So those are groups of viruses that we think have science that are very similar, and we think act in a very similar way, and the biology is very similar. We're going to study the biology in those viral families, and we're going to look at the biology of both the host cell where these viruses eventually live and replicate, and we're going to look at the biology of the viruses themselves. And then in those 2 environments, we're going to try to find novel targets in their biology that we can attack with new drugs. And then we're going to develop those from a clinical perspective, the point where we can turn them on for human use. So that all sounds, pretty simple, right? The reality is the challenge is much harder than that. And again, for those that work in science, have worked in drug development our entire lives, you all know what a big challenge that is. So it's not easy, and we know that, but we believe that we have the right talent to be up for the challenge. So how do we think about, take one of those viral families, how do we think about how the knowledge of a viral family can help us in developing a new drug? So we believe the solution is to look at that viral family and try to understand the common biology within that viral family. Again, that could be within the virus itself, or within the cell in the human body that the virus starts to replicate. And so our scientists are starting to look at both of those domains to understand what's happening with those drugs and try to project what we can do with drugs within that biology. In fact, at UNC right now, and frankly around the world, that's exactly what we're doing with COVID-19. There's a lot of great work that's gone on at UNC already around COVID-19 to find ways to attack the virus in multiple ways. In fact, we have one clinical asset that's moving into the clinic right now that we developed with Vanderbilt and Emory universities here in the US. And there's much of that going on around the world. Our desire is to try and harness all of that great knowledge that's going around in universities and in biopharmaceutical companies together to move in one direction to plan for future pandemics. So I've said already, we believe this is a massive challenge. We don't underestimate the challenge of what we're talking about now. And I don't think any of us, given what we're going through today, thinks this is a simple thing to do. But we believe the core to the success of READY is collaboration. And so we believe that the solution is to collect the knowledge from around the world and start collaborating with the brightest and best across the planet. So we started on our own campus. About a year ago, we funded this project. In fact, the institute that I'm responsible for, one of the key funders of this work, believe it or not, over 12 months ago, when we didn't even know that COVID-19 existed. So we were a little ahead of the game. UNC also has a long history in this type of viral work. We were part and parcel of a lot of the work in HIV probably 30 years ago now. And we believe we've got some core strengths, not in everywhere associated with these with viruses of this type. But we have some core expertise we believe we can bring to the party, so to speak. But on our own campus, that effort was a collaboration across 3 schools: the School of Medicine, the School of Pharmacy, and the School of Public Health. And they've worked as one team to start this journey. They've also worked alongside an organization called SGC. SGC is the Structural Genomics Consortium, which is a group of which we are a member, but it's a group of universities, again, from around the world that have been active over the last 10 years, developing novel targets for disease and novel probes for disease in terms of drug discovery. So alongside SGC and those 3 schools at the University of North Carolina, we started the journey about a year ago. At this point, though, because of COVID-19 and because of the stimulus of COVID-19, we would like the collaboration to go much broader than that. And we've started that dialogue. The first place that we went to was an organization that many of you may know, and that's DNDi. DNDi is an organization, DNDi stands for Drugs for Neglected Diseases. It's the Drugs for Neglected Diseases Institute based in Geneva. It's about 200 people based in Geneva. And DNDi has operated for about the last 10 years. It was put in place by a number of third world governments to develop drugs for neglected diseases, largely in the third world. And DNDi, we believe, have the expertise and the knowledge to help READY get up to speed on the effort that we're trying to put in place here. We believe that DNDi have the knowledge not only through the lens of collaboration, but also through the lens of not only drug discovery, but the equally challenging part of the story, which is the drug development piece of the work that we're talking about here. We believe the NDI can offer not only a lot of help in terms of the setup of this new READY organization, which we believe will be a new global nonprofit organization, but they can show us how they've managed that collaboration and how they've actually got to the point of getting new drugs out of the door, because they have been very successful, not only in talking about this story of drug development, they've actually managed to put it into practice. And they have several examples already of drugs they've been able to put into the market and get to third world countries for really challenging diseases. The final piece of this that I wanted to talk about was the frame. We believe that this new organization needs to operate in the frame of open science. And what we mean by that, and most of you know this, is that we will share all of the science across the collaborators within READY, with the idea that in sharing all of that information, it will be for the greater good. And so open science is a core premise of what we're trying to build here. So when we talk about open science, also we talk about no patents being formed around some of these therapies as they come to play. So the future collaborations that we're looking for, and hopefully there are people on the line right now that can help us with this, is we're looking, so we've got a little bit of interference with somebody's microphone. If you could go to mute, that would be great. Thanks. So the future collaborations that we're looking for, and we would appreciate any help that can be offered on the phone here. First of all, universities. We started to reach out to 20 universities across the globe, about 10 here in the United States and 10 outside the United States, but there may be others that folks on the phone know about that we don't. The second is governmental help. Not too surprisingly, we're asking governments for money to help us. As you know, in the stimulus bill, for example, here in the US, there was quite a lot of money set aside for science with the NIH. Again, our hope is that we can, from governments around the world, we can pool resources and pool investment towards the development of these new therapies. Thirdly, we'd like to build our collaborations with biopharma, with the biopharmaceutical industry. We've already had a couple of offers to help from 2 pharmaceutical companies, and we've not even started the outreach yet. So we're very excited that those 2 pharma companies have already stepped up, and we think others will as we go on this journey. And then finally, philanthropy. I'll talk a little bit about money in a moment, but this effort is not going to be without cost, and that's obvious to everybody on the call. So we believe there's going to be a significant role for philanthropy to play in the development of this plan. So in closing, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the ask. So what we're looking for here, as we set this up, we believe that over the next 5 years, we'll need as much as $125 million to make this effort with READY come to fruition. And so we're reaching out to this group and to many other people alongside all of the potential collaborators I mentioned a moment ago, to find folks who are willing to step up to help put this organization in place. UNC will be, a founding member of this organization, but essentially we're going to be part of the story. We believe, like we have in other collaborations, we have a long history at the university of collaborations around the world. The role that UNC is playing here is an instigator of some of this work. We know we can't do this on our own. We don't claim to be able to do this on our own, far from it. We know that we need many, many collaborators at universities, biopharmaceutical companies, the government, and philanthropists to make this happen. But here's the reality. We're all sitting in a world that many of us never thought we'd be in the space of COVID-19 and this current pandemic. The question is, will we do this again? It's a horrifying thought that if we don't put a strategic plan in place to be ready for the next pandemic, will we be ready is the question. So at that, I'll stop talking because I'm sure you've heard enough about me, and I'll open it up to questions and any thoughts, and certainly any ideas around collaboration. Thanks for listening. And please don't leave me in silence. So feel free to ask a question.
Hi, this is Kavitha. I have a question.
Thanks, Kavita. Yeah.
So we at UNC are really excited about this initiative. If you were to get your first influx of money, where would it go?
Yeah, it's a great question, Kavita. First of all, I think we need to set up this global organization that we've talked about. So I think there's some key roles that we start to put in place around some infrastructure to make this happen. But I think we've got to start with the early biology. It's hard to develop a drug from without the early biology in place. So we have some early work started now at UNC, but it's a very small part of the story. It's essentially looking at drugs in the kinase space against many of these viruses. We don't think in any way, shape, or form that's only going to be, as kinases, by the way, in the host cells that we've been looking at UNC. We obviously, that's just one relatively small opportunity for drugs to be targeted against these viruses. So we would start, as we've started the dialogue now, we'd start to fund early research in the drug discovery space with other mechanisms at other universities that we started to talk to. So I'd say a little bit of infrastructure to start this global organization, and then starting to fund the early drug discovery work at other universities against other types of biology.
Hey, John, there's a question in the chat about understanding READY would focus on viruses beyond just the virus. What collateral health damage on COVID survivors or lung injury would READY address?
Yeah, you know, the core, we think there's an important element here around focus. So we believe that the global entity probably needs to be focused on delivery of those new antivirals. And so we believe the new global non-profit organization should be laser focused at those new therapeutics. But there is other work, and I'll use again UNC as an example. One of the core collaborators that we have on campus is the School of Public Health. And some of you may know some of the talented scientists that we have there. One springs to mind in Ralph Barrick. But you know, we believe that the other piece of readiness that needs to be in play is everything associated with the public health part of these pandemics. And we've all seen it play out over the last few months. You know, I don't think I'd really ever thought about tracking and tracing patients during an event like this. I've all of a sudden become very interested in tracking and tracing patients. So there's a lot of research, for example, we believe needs to happen with technology around these dimensions of managing a pandemic. And so we think READY, through some of the associate organizations, associate universities, will also start to do some research in that public health space as well. I don't know whether that captures a good answer to it, but I think there's going to be other work that needs to happen above and beyond therapeutics for sure. Steve, was that a hand? Do you want to turn you can turn, yeah, you go. Go ahead.
So, really great initiative, and thanks for the presentation, John. I came in about 5 minutes late. I'm recovering from COVID myself, 5 weeks in, but still coughing and still pretty tired. But so my question basically is, there's several parts to it. Who would be your ideal funders? I mean, specific organizations, if you could wave your magic wand. So both as cornerstone funders and others that maybe come in alongside. What about credible individuals that would support this, that would help those funders really come on board? You might have mentioned them before. I just wonder whether you spoke to Larry Brilliant or people of his ilk about it. It seems like Larry would be very significantly interested. Also, Mike Milken at the Milken Institute, who created faster cures you know, they're connected some of the biggest philanthropists in the world, who are also some of the wealthiest financiers, but often health is a really important issue for them. And people like Andre Hoffman of Roche, you know, he's again a big supporter of causes like this. I don't have some of these direct introductions that are easy, but I'm just wondering, who would be your preferred and best funders initially, and who would be credible that would add support to it?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. First of all, I'm glad you're recovering.
Yeah.
You can still hear the cough a little bit, so it sounds like you've got a little bit of ways to go.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's a great question. You know, I don't know whether you were on the phone when I said this, but probably top of the pile for us is the Gates, actually Bill Gates, because of the, you know, in the manner in which he predicted this was going to happen, and so because of that, personally anyway, he would certainly be top of my list. We'd be interested in the philanthropic piece of that.
Do you have any good ins? I mean, do you have a strategy or a method? Are you in with Gates yet?
The good news, Steve, is Gates has already, the Gates Foundation has already funded a number of things on campus, so we've got some connectivity in there. But we've had an early dialogue. They're somewhat overwhelmed with COVID-19 right now, understandably, and that's true of many philanthropic organizations right now, that they are, you know, quite rightly focused on today, right? But you know, with a bit of luck, as we get through COVID-19, I think their minds will open up in the same way ours are right now to the desire for longer term planning, right? I don't think any of us want to be back in this type of situation if we can avoid it. Go ahead, Steve.
Just to add, is there anything about the program and the proposal that is relevant for today and the current context?
No, absolutely. I mean, a lot of the early work right now, and Steve, you see, I'm sure you've seen it too. Both campuses right now, and ours, I don't think is any different to many other campuses around the world. I mean, the amount of work going on COVID-19 right now on our campus, I can say within our School of Pharmacy, but not just within the School of Pharmacy, across campus, medicine, public health, you name it, there's an unbelievable, I mean, what this has created, this pandemic has created, is an unbelievable amount of innovation right now targeted against COVID-19, not only on campuses, but within the biopharmaceutical, the biopharma world. I mean, I look at my old company that I worked at, they've got a bunch of stuff going on in therapeutics. They've got, you know, the testing healthcare employees in the parking lot of the company in Indianapolis. And Lilly's just one example. You know, you see it, Gilead, you name it. I mean, the biopharmaceutical industry and universities, the innovation going on right now is remarkable. I've never seen anything like it. It's remarkable how targeted it has become. Part of it is coalescing it. I think that's part of the challenge. You saw a couple of Fridays ago, the NIH, Francis Collins put his arms around about a dozen pharma companies and said, hey, let's try and move in the same direction rather than being somewhat tactical in the work that you're doing. And I think that's a little bit of what we've got to do here through a science lens, is learn from this near-term experience and then garner the effort in a strategic manner with a longer-term goal of being better prepared. So going back to your question, Steve, though, in terms of what our wish list is, you know, people like Gates and the Zuckerberg Foundation, etc., would be top of the list alongside government. You know, we think we're pretty close to a significant grant from one government in the next few days. We would hope we would do similar sorts of thing. That's not the US. It would be somewhere outside of the US without going too far on that. So I think the major philanthropy organizations alongside governments is essentially where we would start. And then I think the last thing I'd say, Steve, is as we get to the back end of this type of work and you get into clinical development, you get out of the universities, you get out of the labs and into clinical development, then I think there's a major role for the biopharmaceutical industry. And you see examples right now. So if you look at vaccine development right now, you've got organizations like J&J who are manufacturing 1 billion doses of their potential vaccine at risk. They don't even know whether the vaccine is going to work, but they want to be ready to go if the efficacy data and safety data looks good and they can get that COVID-19 vaccine out. And there are a number of examples. Another example with AstraZeneca yesterday with Oxford, with the work that Oxford University is doing. So we have a long list. It would start with those major philanthropic foundations and governments, but we think this is going to need many, many organizations to be successful. Does that answer? Answer your question, Steve?
Yeah, it does. I mean, it's really comes down to what's the sort of process and who's involved to be able to get those institutions on board. I mean, it's basically got to be sold, and clearly the proposal makes sense. I'm just curious as to who do you perceive as the threats or those who would resist, such a collaborative effort. And going back to the individuals that would add real credibility to the advisory board or whatever, have you got a wish list there as well?
Yeah, for sure. So in terms of risks, I would say, a couple of things. One is, this open science concept is can be challenging at times through the nature of both universities, because universities like the idea of patenting the science, but it's true for the biopharmaceutical industry as well. So I think that's one of the barriers, is getting people into the mindset of sharing information around the world. So that's one, I think that's one potential barrier. And I think the other is complacency. I think, the fact that Bill Gates was talking about this for probably 5 years and nobody listened. I'm not Bill Gates. Wish I was Bill Gates. No, I don't really. But you see what I mean in terms of complacency. That would be, I think, the biggest risk is that we take a breath after COVID-19, no pun intended, and then decide that we're not going to plan. Governments, generally speaking, because of their timeline, they tend to be thinking about, the next event for them as the next election or whatever it is. They're not known necessarily for strategic planning. And I think, for me, that open science concept alongside complacency, I think, are the biggest risks. And then to answer the second part of your question, yeah, we have a list. We have not filled, for example, the board of this new nonprofit. And I think we need to be very thoughtful about who we put on that board, because I think if we choose well and we manage to persuade some core folks to be on that board, I think it will make a massive difference to the success of this enterprise. Any other questions? Okay. So first of all, I appreciate everybody's time for jumping on, and at least in the US at this relatively early time, and I guess close to drinks in Europe, right? We appreciate the time to share a little bit more about Ready. We'd love to connect with folks that are on the call that believe they want to be involved in any way, shape, or form. Great news is, since we announced this, we've had lots of offers of help, and which is great, from a range of folks. One of the things that COVID-19 has done is it's focused everybody's mind. So we've had, calls from undergraduate students at Columbia University and the like saying, how can I help? And I think if there's a good thing that's come out of COVID-19, it's focusing people's minds. So, you know, that if you have ideas to connect us to sources of both science, of resources, then we're all ears. And if you want to get involved, we welcome everybody on this journey. So thank you for the time for everybody. We appreciate it. And we look forward to a day that we're better prepared for moments like this and moments that we're in right now. So thanks for the time and have a great weekend.
Did you share, is there contact details?
Absolutely. Yeah. I should have said that, Steve. That's a good reminder. So if you want to, if you do want to contact us, we have a website. It's largely a landing page right now at ready.org. So READDI.org. And you can contact me on an email through that website. It's johnbamforth@ready.org. And Steve, it sounds like it would be great to connect as well. And hopefully your recovery will speed up. So thanks to everybody and have a great weekend.
Thank you, John. This was fabulous.
Thanks.
Thank you, John.
Pleasure.